We've reconvened for the afternoon session. First, I'm going to do public comment. So anyone for public comment? Anyone online that would want to give public comment?
If you're on the Zoom call and would like to give public comment, you can hit *9 to raise your hand.
And we will do again at the end of the meeting.
It doesn't look like we have anybody.
Okay. Well, with that, Jeff, please call the next case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Mitchell for the record. We are going to go back under agenda item C. This was one that was continued from earlier in the day until we could address it. For possible action, notice of appearance recommendations by the Secretary to dismiss taxpayers' appeal pursuant to NAC 361.7014 for the 2021-2022 secured roll. Decision not heard by the County Board, determination of jurisdiction of the State Board pursuant to NRS 361.155 sub 6. If you may, I may give a little bit of an explanation on this.
Please.
It was a little confusing, as in the appeal that was filed was for a previous tax year. It was for the 2020-2021 secured roll form, but I believe that the taxpayer was trying to appeal for the 21-22 secured roll. There was a letter submitted upon receiving a notice of valuation, and my understanding is that they did submit some information to the county, and an adjustment was made for the 21-22 secured roll. But if they are appealing the 2020-2021 secured roll, the recommendation for denial of jurisdiction still stands from the Secretary, as that would be over a year late being filed.
I appreciate that. First, is Kim on the line? And if so, we want you to be sworn in if you were not sworn in this morning.
My understanding is that they were going to try to be available, and then they contacted us and said that they would not be available.
Okay, great. Well, with that, let's proceed and hear the case. Seeing as we don't have the petitioner, Clark, give us a summary from your end, and then we'll let you know if we have any questions.
Good afternoon, Doug Scott for the record. The subject property is located at 4467 Sapphire Moon Avenue in North Las Vegas. And we don't really have too much background information. I can tell you a little bit about the property. I'm not sure what the petitioner's issue was. In 2021, we had the taxable value reduced to $287,094 via an assessor recommendation to the County Board of Equalization, which is a value that may be lower than the petitioner thinks. And then for 2021-2022, the value was $288,677, and both of those taxable values for those years are lower than what their purchase price was as of December 2019 when they purchased it for $298,220.
Great. Thank you.
So, Doug, to clarify, there was a reduction for the 2021, the 21-22 tax year has been adjusted, and did that, so they're appealing for something that's already, it sounds like, been accomplished. Is that?
That's what I believe. The 2021-2022 value was the closed roll value. And we believe that they may have had an issue with the 2020-2021 value, because that was originally at a taxable value over $300,000. And it was actually the builder owned it at the time, the developer. as of December 2019. And so they appealed the value because they thought it was too high, and it turns out that we hadn't applied the subdivision discount. And so therefore, we reduced it on an assessor recommendation to 287,094. So there may have been, in reading through the materials, reading the letter that's in the packet, it appears that maybe the taxpayer wasn't aware that that value was in fact reduced.
Be that as it may be, the appeal for the 2021 tax year, the window for opportunity for appealing that has long since closed.
That's correct.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just want to make sure, Mr. Schiffmacher, that we're clear. This was a supplemental, meaning, so sometimes we have our current year appeals that we're able to appeal, and then we have our supplemental, which is our prior years. So this was a supplemental value that was added for the unsecured roll. So had they appealed to the county board, as they should have, then they would have been able to appeal that value. However, this taxpayer, this owner, did not appeal to the county board. But in spite of that, we did an assessor recommendation because we recognized there was some obsolescence for the total neighborhood. And I think other properties as well as this one got a reduction in spite of the fact that this taxpayer did not file an appeal on this particular one. It may be that they didn't file an appeal because they weren't the owner of record at the time and the developer was. I just don't have that information readily available to you to clarify that. But in the end, this taxpayer, we would agree with the Secretary's position that they don't have a right to appeal it to your level. But in spite of all that, we believe the values that we've reduced it to meet what they're asking for. So we're actually concluding to a number that's lower than their sales price that they supposedly purchased it for. So I think they're going to be satisfied. I think they were concerned that their tax bill hadn't been adjusted, and that wouldn't have been adjusted at the time they wrote this letter because we were in the middle of that process at the time.
And also, I emailed the assistant treasurer this morning just to make sure that the taxes were adjusted for the 2021 tax year.
Just for my clarification, what would the window have been for the appeal of the 2021 supplemental assessment? What would that window have been?
It would have still been by January 15th of this year of 2021.
Okay.
But it would have been, the date of appraisal would have been January of 2020 versus January of 2021 for all of our current year cases. So that's what we would have been measuring had we done a valuation estimate on it and that kind of thing. So we didn't have to present that evidence to the county. We just went there saying, yeah, we recognize maybe this area all needed to be adjusted, and we went ahead and made those adjustments.
Any other questions from the board of Clark County?
Nope, I was ready to make a motion.
Well, in that case, we're ready to hear your motion.
Okay, based upon the information we've been provided, both in writing and orally today, I would make a motion to uphold the county's amount of $289,220 as not exceeding the fair market value, and also
I'm just gonna, with this one, we don't even have to get to that level. We just need to say that we're
We'll
gonna deny
accept it.
jurisdiction because it wasn't heard at the county, and we found no compelling reason to overcome that.
so moved.
Okay.
Second.
Any other comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Jeff, please call the next case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following the agenda, cases number 21-152 and 21-170 have both been withdrawn, so we will proceed with case number 21-159, Srmf, Town Square Owner, LLC, commercial property. The petitioner is represented by Carol Hewitt, and the respondent is the Clark County Assessor. Proper notice of hearing can be found on page 165 of your packet.
Thank you, Jeff. Clark County, can you please give us an overview of the property? Take your time. Don't let us rush you.
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Doherty, representing the Assessor's Office. The subject property is Town Square, an upscale lifestyle center developed located at the southwest corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Sunset Road. The property was built in 2007. The property's gross leasable area is comprised of several commercial occupancies contained in 22 separate buildings. The occupancies include retail, office, theater, and restaurant. In addition to the gross leasable area, the property includes 268,508 square feet of parking garage and 2 restroom buildings containing 1,672 square feet. As reported by the rent roll, the property is, as of the valuation date, was 87.3% occupied by national retailers as well as some local and regional tenants. The Assessor's Office recommends no reduction to the taxable value as estimated at $322,980,237.
Thank you. Now let's go to the petitioner. And first, will you introduce yourself and let us know if you've been sworn in today, and if not, we'll have you sworn in.
Good
You
afternoon.
appear to be on mute.
My name is Carol Hewitt. I'm with Paradigm Tax Group. I have not been sworn in yet.
Michelle, will you please swear in Carol?
Sure. Ms. Hewitt, if you could raise your right hand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. For brief orientation, Carol, what we're going to do is we'll give you 15 minutes to present your case. We might ask some questions at the end. Then the assessor's office will have 15 minutes to present their case, questions again, and then you'll have 5 minutes for a final rebuttal. At that point, we'll close the hearing, we'll deliberate as a board, and we'll render a decision. So with that being said, you've got 15 minutes to present your case.
Thank you. And I have been looking at watching some of the other cases today, so I have kind of a sense of how this works. Appreciate your patience with me here. This property, as you know, was described earlier, is this kind of lifestyle retail space area. We've reviewed this property for several years, and of course, this is the one time we have appealed the property based on, as probably you've encountered this year, based on the COVID issues. We do recognize that Nevada does have a very generous tax cap situation, especially with this particular property, which is, of course, one of the reasons why it was never appealed in the past. This year was the one time we appealed the property, and I was given a 11-month income statement, which was presented to the county, as well as a rent roll. And on the income statement, as well as the rent roll, it showed a very high, although the vacancy is relatively low, the receipts that have been collected from those tenants, the negative increased quite a bit this year, up to I believe the rent roll showed a value of about $8.8 million that had not been collected. Based on we did just basically a quick income statement with a 9 cap essentially on because of the nature of this property this year, and suggest recommended a value, I believe, of around $160,746,000. And that's essentially my presentation today.
Thank you. Board members, any questions for Carol at this point? Seeing as none, I want to hear from Clark County, and then on rebuttal, we probably will have some questions for you, Carol. But go ahead, Carol, and... Sorry.
Well, Town Center is a very upscale development. It's a regional open-air lifestyle center with, as I mentioned, it has retail, dining, entertainment, office space, and public parks on 94 acres. I'd like to show you some pictures of the property, which is in the case, SBE pages 129 through 136. And a site plan showing you the overall scope of the development is on SBE 137. As you can see by these illustrations, this is not just any shopping center. Its 22 buildings are architecturally distinctive, creating an ambiance of historic town center. Town Square attracts local residents here in the Las Vegas area as well as tourists, as it's located on Las Vegas Boulevard, just south of Mandalay Bay and McCarran Airport. Town Square offers many attractions to build their business there, such as free music events during the summer months, a park called The Green. That's a 12,000 square foot grass park. They have a 9,000 square foot children's park / playground, and an additional park called Town Square Park of 6,500 square feet. Town Square attracts many major important retailers, upscale retailers, and national tenants. Some of the tenants that are there, for example, are Apple, H&M, Old Navy, Saks, Sephora, TJ Maxx, Container Store, Ulta, Tommy Bahama, Victoria's Secret, and Whole Foods. Contract rents achieved here are commensurate with the quality of this development. They're well above our market averages here in Clark County. For example, P.F. Chang's leases of 7,000 or so square foot space, and they're paying $51 a square foot net with escalations of 9% annually. Sephora is located in a 6,200 square foot space, and they're paying $65 per square foot net. Verizon has a 5,000 square foot space. They're paying $47 per square foot net. K Jewelers is there in a 1,600 square foot space, paying $77 per square foot. So in the assessor's evaluation of the property, we calculated potential gross income based on these various occupancies. I'd like to also, the page that I'm referring to is SBE 99. We divided up the area based on the occupancies, as I described before. For a retail, more inline type space, we're estimating on a monthly basis a rental rate of $2.50 per square foot. That equates to $30 per square foot. The supermarket, the Whole Foods market, we're basing that on their contract rate of about $1.40 per square foot monthly. The office space is offered for lease at $2.70 per square foot modified gross, and we're estimating a net rental rate at $2 per square foot. The theater space, based on their contract rent, we're estimating at $1.93 per square foot. In their restaurant space of pretty near 80,000 square feet, We're estimating based on their actual contract rents, which is illustrated in SBE 101, at $4 per square foot monthly net. That generates a potential gross income of $35,308,795. We estimate a vacancy and credit loss based on a weighted average for office and retail space, a weighted average based on the subjects about 81% retail occupancy and 19% office space occupancy. We're estimating a market vacancy of 8.5%. We add in other income as supplied by documents supplied by the appellant at $400,000. We're estimating expenses at 8% based on ICSC, which is International Council of Shopping Center data, at 8%, to generate a net operating income of $30,146,144. To that, we apply a capitalization rate of 8%. This is based on PricewaterhouseCoopers data. Their average for a property of this type is 6.9%. And we also consider Las Vegas area 2020 retail sales. For the property class, the average cap rate was 6.08%. That data is illustrated on SBE 121. So we go with a more conservative 8% cap rate. The indicated value by this income method is $376,826,800. To that, we apply an adjustment because we want to account for the extra vacancy generated by the COVID shutdown. At this time, I have a corrected page that I'd like to distribute. It takes care of a small typo that's on the original page on SBE 99, which actually is very small. It's about 0.1% of the indicated value. But just to be totally clear and accurate, I'd like to pass out this corrected page.
Petitioner, do you have any objections to that? Have you seen the corrected page? And you're muted once again, Carol. Oh, no, sorry. The two Carols are going to get to me here. Petitioner, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, sorry about that. No, I have no objection if Carol Ann would just like to let me know what that change is.
Yeah, can you let the petitioner know first, and then, as there's no objections, pass them out to us?
Yes, as originally presented at the county level, the lease-up expense adjustment was $2,222,815, but the correct number is $2,679,267. So that's a difference of $456,000. And as I mentioned, it's about 0.1% of the indicated value and doesn't change any of our conclusions.
I have no objection.
Because the subject property is at 87.3%, the subject property is at 87.3% occupancy, which is what we believe to be below market. We did an adjustment on a discounted cash flow format, which is found on SBE 100. We're assuming a stabilized vacancy of 9%, and the actual vacancy is rounded at 13%. So we're going to lease up this vacant space over a 3-year time frame. 3-year absorption period. We're assuming a lease rate of $2.40 a square foot which is $28.80 per square foot per year annually. And we're assuming rent escalation of 2.5%. That discounted cash flow is present valued at 6%, a safe rate. And that indicates an adjustment of the corrected number of, $2,679,267. So our indicated property value is $374,147,533, which equates to about $308 per square foot. This is in line with our year 2020 sales in the metro area for a property of its type. Okay, the imputed value, the actual taxable value, is closer to $264 per square foot. And we believe that our analysis supports that value. Sales that have occurred, as I mentioned, during the year 2020 in the metro area are presented on SBE 121 and 122. And looking at the first grouping on page 121, at the top of the page, the first category includes more investment type properties, investment grade lifestyle centers, newer, probably better tenanted properties. And the mean sale price per square foot for that property category is $405 per square foot, with a median of $386 per square foot. The subject probably would fall into that category, but as we went through our analysis, we're a little bit more on the conservative side and probably putting it into the second category of our sales, which is neighborhood centers. As illustrated on page 122, the average sale price per square foot during 2020 for this property type is $191 per square foot, with a median of $170. More generally inferior properties to the subject would be the general retail and, of course, the distressed categories. General retail properties sold at a mean of $153 per square foot during 2020 and a median of $146 per square foot. The county's value, I believe, is very well supported by our analysis.
I appreciate that question relative to comparable sales, and it's your first one listed on page 121, which is Crossroads Commons. I believe that's over in Summerlin. That's the highest price sale at $50 million. It was an escrow, so I'm curious, A, if it closed, B, if you learned the capitalization rate for that subsequent, and C, does that have any office space in it?
I do not believe Crossroad Commons has office space. It is substantially open and operating, and it has a similar anchor to the subject at the Whole Foods. It's in a very, fairly upscale area, similar demographics.
Did the sale close? It's listed as an escrow here on the information. Or maybe it did close. It's sale price.
I
don't know.
think, yeah, as far as I know, it closed in December 2020.
Okay, that's what you have, and I don't know where. I thought I saw escrow.
okay.
But, okay, so that is a closed sale. And the capitalization rates, have you learned that subsequent?
That I do not know.
Okay.
I also have a question regarding the sales. The subject properties, if I'm reading this correctly, somewhat over 1,000,002 square feet. Is that right?
Yes.
And the only two large sales that you have are the Crossroads Commons at 173,000 and Sunrise Marketplace at 193,000. And the two sale prices on those range from $168 a square foot to $293 a square foot. The vast majority of the sales that are listed on either of these charts are well less than 50,000 square feet, and in many cases less than 10,000 square feet. Do those, in your view, have much relevance to the valuation of 1,000,002 square feet?
I would say yes. This is our local data. Attempting to use comps from other states is, I'd say, riskier because we don't know anything about their local economy, how their property had been operating, where it's located, its access, visibility, reputation, their tenancy. We don't know anything about these other nationwide sales. We do know a fair amount about our local sales. And Las Vegas is more of a tertiary size market. We just don't have that many large retail kind of developments like Town Square. So we just have to work with the sales that we have here.
So I would argue that personally, that the national sales for a property of this nature would be more valuable because that would represent the thought process that an investor with $300 million would be undertaking, as opposed to somebody who's spending $710,000 on some random little building. Their thought processes are going to be different. This property is not one that would likely be purchased by an individual who was only looking in the Las Vegas market. With $300 million, you're able to expand your search as an investor to include virtually anywhere in the U.S. Or internationally, and so that national pool of information, particularly in this kind of a property, would be very informative. And the buyer of this property would probably have similar information on the sales throughout the nation that you would have, and would be an active participant and have that basis of knowledge. So in this case, I'm a little concerned that you're using median averages and means from these really much different kinds of properties. Savers on Lake Mead Boulevard really doesn't represent the motivations of somebody who would be buying a 1,000,000 square foot lifestyle center. So that just causes me some concern. Kind of a rhetorical comment, I suppose.
Well, I think that makes sense, and that's why our sales comparison is, we really view it as supportive and an indicator of value, and we rely primarily on the income approach analysis.
And I want to talk a little bit about the office and the theater space. We've heard earlier that the office market's weak. We know through the pandemic that theaters for a long time weren't able to operate. So I want to understand how you accounted for some of that, or does this office space here not follow the general trends of Las Vegas because of design, location, something else? So if you could talk a little bit about those two and the rents that are projected for them and the risk and vacancy factor.
Okay. The theater, I think, blends in very well with the subject property because, as I was trying to describe Town Square, it's trying to appeal as more of an entertainment location as well as office and shopping. So I think it's a very good addition to the lineup of occupancies. I know it's up and operating now. And our assumption was the contract rent of $1.92 per square foot. The office space, which I mentioned, is about 19% of gross leasable area. It's upscale office. There's, as I recall, a number of attorneys located there. I did a blended calculation using occupants, the vacancy rate for office as well as retail, which, oh, here, I got it. Okay, I did a vacancy rate blending retail and office. Retail for its submarket was reflecting a vacancy rate of 6.5%, and that was weighted at 81.4%. And office vacancy was 17% for that submarket, and I weighted that at 18.6% to come up with the 8.5 vacancy estimate. I think the direction that this property is going in is the lifestyle center. The different occupancies provide a synergy. The office tenants ideally will be eating lunch at the restaurants and shopping after work, something like that. From what I can see, that's the direction the property is going in. So it's sort of is a synergy. It works hand in hand with each other, complementing each other. And it's very much like a couple other successful properties that have recently been developed in the Las Vegas area, like downtown Summerlin, which opened about 8 years ago, and it's been tremendously successful. It's the same mix, lifestyle center mix, major tenant retailers as well as a large office building. And a theater is also on the premises. There seems to be a trend actually nationwide in developing more diversified kind of retail properties. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think this will be my last question for now. And my apologies if it's in the information, I didn't see it. Do we know how this property actually performed in 2020, what its actual receivables were versus what they were projected to receive, and what kind of concessions they had to give to tenants?
The performance. Well, the petitioner did submit an 11-month statement of rental income and expenses. However, we have nothing to compare that to. The assessor's office did request in the summer of 2020 information about operating conditions and attempt to make an economic obsolescence adjustment for properties of the subject's type. We received nothing from this property owner. I don't know how much concessions they've made. That information was not provided with regard to recent leasing and concession packages.
Okay, and that'll be a question when we get back to the petitioner. There's a lot of financial information in there, but I wasn't able to piece it together enough to be able to answer that question. But it might well be in that information. But that was all for me. Any other questions from the board members?
Yes, my comments and reservations are similar to that of Bob's here. With 19% commercial and the understanding that there's a decrease demand currently for commercial, and I appreciate the concept that this property is somewhat similar to downtown Summerlin, but downtown Summerlin is also relatively. It's almost basically connected to a hotel. B, you also have kind of mixed use within some of the living space, so it really does have that lifestyle center that you speak of. Can you just talk a little bit about how you did actually account for the commercial side, just so that we can understand?
The commercial side, meaning the retail occupancy?
No, meaning office space, I should really speak to.
Okay. The office space, gross leasable area is about 226,766 square feet. I did speak with the listing agent for this space, which is CB Richard Ellis, a while back, and reviewed their marketing materials. They are allowing, or they have allowed, a lease-up expense, or I'm sorry, a tenant improvement expense of $25 to, I think it was $40 per square foot for these tenants. They market it as Class A office, and what they do advertise or tout about it is the amenities that are offered at this location. For example, this is on SBE 126, that the property's at a signalized intersection, monument signage offered, shopping amenities, dining amenities, convenient to McCarran Airport, opportunity to be with other Class A type tenants. I'm reading here, unparalleled on-site amenities. A lot of this office is above the retail space on the first floor. Parking is very convenient. There's 3 parking garages plus surface parking. So that's not a problem at all for office users. They need not pay for parking that they have to do at a lot of other locations. Does that help answer?
Yes, I appreciate the advertisements, but I'm more concerned with, have you been able to show any parallels, comparisons to any other properties that are similar, not necessarily even similarly situated, just within the Las Vegas market as it comes to office space and how we're approaching that in general?
It's been compared with, this is SBE 123. Office property located on Mall Ring Circle, which is the Henderson area near Galleria Mall. Locations on Eastern Avenue and Greer Drive. It's comparable. It's very desirable space for some tenants. Couldn't be better. Other tenants, it's not really their ideal choice. It's been leasing up over several years, and the occupancy there now is well, as of the valuation date, the vacancy was about 17%.
Thank you. Any questions, Glenn, Bob? And let me just see if Clark County wants to add anything else before.
Yes, I'm just wanting Carol to address, I know, I understand what Mr. Gray's question is, and I think we've got some better information. I don't think this is a struggling office area. I'm not saying that it's great office in general. In our valley has always been struggling comparative to maybe other parts of the country where they have downtown centers and things like that. However, it's not as bad as it was during the downturn years, and we have seen vacancies as high as 25 and 30% during those years. We're not seeing that right now. And so I know that you had asked some questions in the previous case. I apologize, we're not prepared to address that in the detail that I think you're looking for here today. But I just would like Carol to address that if the vacancy is truly 17% and the rental rates are supportable based on what they're actually renting for right now, we have not addressed that in an aggressive manner. I think we've addressed based on what they've provided to us. So I want to make sure we're answering the board's questions as best we can.
Yes, to follow up, office space is about 19% of their total gross leasable area. So we're viewing it as a secondary component to the primary space. Rental rates achieved have been between $2 and $3 per square foot on a modified gross basis. And in our estimate of potential gross income, we're estimating a monthly rent of $2 per square foot. And in my opinion, that was a reasonable estimation based on these contract rents.
So I'm going to change tack a little bit. So I'm looking at the package, the historic income statements that the property owner provided. And the first question I've got is, this property is now 13 years old or so. Had it achieved stabilized occupancy prior to the recession caused by COVID, in your view?
Yeah, definitely the retail section, yes.
Okay. The reason I ask is that if you refer to page 94 in the package, the net operating income, which appears kind of near the top of that page, which would be arguably equivalent to EBITDA, is $23 million in 2018. And then if you go to page 90, approximately the same place on the page, in 2019, the net operating income shows up at $23,269,000. In 2020, on page 86, and I think that this is a full year, but I'm not entirely sure whether it is or not. We show a net operating income of $17,546,000, reflecting the impact of the COVID pandemic. But then we go to your income or your income statement or your analysis, and bear with me just a second while I find that page, which I see on page 99. You're starting out with a net operating income projection of $30 million, which is $7 million more than the highest ostensibly stabilized year. If you look at your net operating income line in that second block. And I'm wondering whether I'm missing something in terms of net operating income, your projection versus a stabilized historical, the stabilized historical data.
From what I understand, for the year 2020, it's representing 11 months of operation. Although I do see where it says December 2020 at the top of page 86. In looking at SBE 20, information from the petitioner.
Hang on just a second, let me get there. Okay.
Okay, the last paragraph, it says year-to-date 11/20 income statement and rent roll are attached. And in their calculation, they're annualizing the information. So I interpret that to mean the attached income statement and the page that you're referencing, page 86, is 11 months. And
But even those don't tie together, because on page 86, the net operating income is reported at 17 million versus the 14 or 15 million dollars that's on page 20.
No, the difference is recoveries. So they add back in recoveries, so then 17 does tie right there, doesn't it? But look up here at 17, because that's I think that's net income. The 17 match?
17,546.
No, it doesn't match. Okay, it does not. We will want to
Because there's expenses, and I'm not sure where that number didn't, I don't think the number that appears on page 20 appears anywhere else in the documentation, unless I'm missing something.
well, that's the petitioner's information. I don't really
Right.
know where it came from.
Well, my concern is that they're reporting some historic information for what might be stabilized years in 18 and 19, which is fairly consistent, but is substantially below what you're reporting or what you're using as your net operating income for your discount or direct capitalization approach. And then I understand that you're reducing that by a lease-up cost to recover or return to a stabilized level. I understand that component. It's just the starting point seems to be off by a bit.
Okay. Our estimates of rent is based on the contract rental rates as well as market comps, averages for the submarket. And rental rates for retail had been increasing up through 2019, so that might account for some of the discrepancy.
But wouldn't that have been reflected in their actual operating statements?
Well, the earliest is okay, 2018 is the earliest. And that is about the same as 2019.
At around $23 million net operating income.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we try to do in our analysis is just go with the most relevant data closest to the valuation date. The current rental rate that would be in effect, as I mentioned, we relied on contract rents where possible. And the estimate of $35,308,000 is generated by current data.
And I think a lot of this will be cleared up when we ask the petitioner about it. other income, there seems to be a big difference where the subject had an annualized other income of 1.3 million in 2020. You've got other income of 460,000. So is that percentage rent? Are they renting parking spaces? What are they doing to generate that other income?
Most of it is kiosk income.
Okay. And I'll wait for you, Bob. The difference on page 20, they're adding back in the recoveries, and the assessor nets them out, which that's fine too, because they're looking at it from a triple net perspective. Yeah, but the net still is different.
Regardless of what occurs above that line,
Yeah.
whether you're netting them out or adding them and subtracting them back and forth, the net operating income should come out the bottom, regardless of the method of calculating. That net operating income is what we should be looking at.
I agree. Any other questions from the board at this point? Okay, Carol, back to you for 5 minutes, and I will give you longer. We're going to ask some questions relative to actual income for 2020 and what that looked like versus what you were scheduled to receive. So any clarity you can give us along those lines would be helpful, and if not, we'll ask questions at the end.
Okay. Yes, I was looking at my report as you all were talking. And yes, originally what we submitted was the 11-month statement, which is then annualized to with a 9% cap to give us, and I had said 160 million, I meant 175 for an annualized value. Then it was, I believe the county, I can't recall at this moment, but I believe the county requested more historical financials. So included in this report to the state was then included, I did receive a 12-month 2020 statement, and then also included the 19 and 18 statements. So, Mr. Chairman, you had asked about how 2020 did vis-a-vis their budget. I don't have that information. These financials don't show that, and I didn't ask that question. Obviously, compared to what 18 and 19, how the property was performing, obviously this was quite a downturn from those 2 years. I would agree with your colleague about the net operating income, performance on this property being less than what the county shows in their pro forma. And I would agree that the sales comparables that the county provided are not really comparable at all. But really, this whole appeal is based on what their performance was in 2020. Also included was a balance sheet from 2020 that again highlights the fact of that they were their collections were way down, detrimentally down, as well as at the very end of the rent roll that was provided, they actually show that number as well. They're different numbers, but they're high numbers. One is around 8.8 million, I believe, on the rent roll. One is about 9 plus million on their balance sheet. This is the basis for this appeal for this year based on these financials for 2020. And that concludes what I'm presenting. If any questions you have, please let me know.
So again, going back to those pages that I'd referenced before, if we look at page 94 and page 90 showing net operating income of around $23.5 million,
Correct.
does that represent, in your view, a stabilized net operating income for this property Or is the property still in lease up, even though it's 13 years old? Is this where this property is likely to live, barring catastrophes like we've seen in the last year?
I believe that it's my opinion that this shows a fairly stabilized performance
Okay.
for this property.
Okay. And I'm looking at the income statement for December 2020,
Correct.
and I'm looking on page 83, if you'll turn to that page. And
Okay.
on this particular report, you're reporting bad debt and uncollectible rents at $6.006 million, which is different than all of the other numbers we've heard. I did see the number of $8.6 million in uncollectibles. I think that was at the bottom of the 2020 rent roll. I did see the other number, which was something larger than that. But from the income statement, is this number, in your view, representative of the losses, somewhat representative of the losses in revenue associated with the pandemic? Or is this
Yes,
number?
I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe if you check the other statements, their bad debt, the 2018 on page 91, they're showing a bad debt of 1.2 million, 1.794, I should say. I was saying rounding to 2 million.
Right.
So it has increased.
Okay.
It was 621,019. That's on page 87.
You've provided so much information, it's kind of
Sorry.
time consuming to try to get to the places I'm looking for. Okay. Okay, I'm done.
I'm going to ask an easier question. Capitalization rate 9% is what you put forth in your letter at the beginning. What support do you have for the 9% capitalization rate?
And admittedly, there's not any support other than just the feeling that 8% this year for a property of 1 million square feet of primarily retail, with a lot of retail not performing this year, seemed to be a reasonable cap rate.
I appreciate that. And then you have in there, it's, I don't know, around page 80, a list of tenants that aren't performing at the end of the year. Do you have any further clarity relative to those tenants? If the property owner had any reasonable expectation of them reopening, or that is what it is at the end of the day, that's the amount that they didn't collect in revenue for the year, and those are the comments that the property owner understood?
Yeah, I don't know if you're asking how are they doing, have they come back, are they bouncing back? I don't have that information.
Okay. Any other questions? With that, I'm going to close it. Bob is madly scribbling, so I want to hear his thoughts. I have on the surface problems capitalizing the worst year at a high cap rate. I think that's counterintuitive. If we're going to use the lower income that was generated in 2020, that's probably a relatively safe income stream going forward and should be capitalized lower if we're going to go down that path. So you can't have low income and then capitalize it high. I don't think that's appropriate. But with that, I want to hear what your thoughts are, Bob.
So I agree with the methodology that the county used overall. I think that capitalizing a stabilized income at a reasonable rate and then deducting lease-up costs is a reasonable method of attack. Based upon the information I have, I think that you've overestimated the net operating income on a stabilized basis to the tune of something in the order of $7 million. Having gone through this, I think that your lease-up costs or your stabilization costs are probably fairly reasonable. I don't have an overall disagreement with the overall capitalization rate, assuming stabilization. But if I substitute what I think is a more documentable net operating income projection, I've picked a number that is better represented by the 2018 and 2019 incomes, net operating incomes of $23,269,000 and $23,404,000. I have chosen a number near the center of $23,300,000 as a net operating income on stabilization. If I capitalize that at 8%, I end up with a stabilized value of approximately $291,250,000. If I deduct your revised lease-up expense of $2,679,267, I end up with an as-is value based upon all of that methodology of about $288,570,733 as a as-is value. Using, again, really the only change I've made is to make a modification to your net operating income projection based upon the documentation that we have available from the property's actual operations. And so that I think would address my concern regarding the net operating income projection. It would be one thing if we did not have any historic information and we were trying to produce this analysis from whole cloth, but we do have a lot of documentation getting to a number that's in that $23 to $24 million a year net operating income. Ben?
Yeah. Bob, I appreciate what you've done there, and we're struggling with the same thing, is the numbers just weren't adding up to me. I do think there's risk in this type of property. Office, theater, it was a tough year, and at the end of the beginning of this year, January 1st, 2021, how was this type of property going to perform? The other way to go about it, it's a test of reasonableness of what you did, is let's take their annualized net from last year, $15,782,385,000, call that the actual net operating income.
We actually have the net operating income that shows up on page 86 of $17,546,000.
Yeah.
That's the actual that's reported in their income statement.
Perfect. And let me just redo them. And where we're going to get there is a capitalization rate based on existing income of 6%. And for an investor buying it, I'm going to buy it at a cap rate at 6. I'm going to have upside potential. That seems reasonable based on existing income. I think the primary method to ascribe value would be what you look through, looking back at historical and then making a deduction for lease-up costs. But I think as a secondary test of reasonableness, here's this property that was previously generating $24 million a year. It's only going to generate 17 this year. I know I have some upside. I'm going to pay a lower capitalization rate for it. I think that supports your number as well. So I am comfortable there. And the sales we saw as comparables just weren't comparable. 100,000 square foot retail only center doesn't compare, and that's no knock on the assessor. There just isn't the sales data in the valley to be able to project that. But those sales just aren't probative of the subject, and we were pretty close on a price per square foot to a much smaller center, which caused me some pause.
So I've used some rounded numbers, but if we use a value of $288 million and 1.2 million square feet, it ends up at $240 a square foot, which seems to be consistent with the two largest local sales that we have.
I concur with that. I would welcome the thought of Glenn. Okay. And Tyree, what are you thinking over there?
No, I tend to agree with the analysis. My initial inclination was to, after reviewing and hearing testimony, was a reduction, and I believe that this is a well thought out method of getting to it. So if there was a motion, I would be likely to second and or vote in the affirmative.
Well, let's see if Bob wants to make a motion.
So, Mr. Chairman, in case number 21-159, I move that after considering all of the testimony presented, the information presented in the package and our discussion, that based upon my prior conversation using a net operating income projection of $23,300,000 and an overall capitalization rate of 8%, which results in a stabilized value of $291,250,000, we would then deduct stabilization costs as estimated or calculated by the assessor of $22,679,267, resulting in a current as-is value of $288,570,733 as a total taxable value, with any difference between the roll value and the current taxable value being applied as obsolescence to the improvements.
Is there a second to that?
I will second.
And any further comments? My only comment's going to be incorporate in all of our discussion we had on the record and your motion for support for how you arrived at that. I thought it was well thought out. With that said, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. With that, Jeff, will you give us some guidance on how many more cases, and if you have a feel for how long? And I'm looking for, should we take 5 minutes now, or should we get done with the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before you do that, I want to thank both the appellant and the assessor. This complicated project.
To cut you off.
This was a complicated project, and I appreciate all the work that you did, both of you. The package was quite complete, and overall, I compliment you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Chairman. Oh. With current withdrawals on the agenda, we have one more case that is outstanding to be heard today. That is case number 21-150.
Great. How's everyone doing? Are we ready to hear one case and be done? Or is there the desire for a 5-minute break? We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we will be back at 2:35 to hear our last case. We're back on the record. Jeff, will you call the next case?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under Agenda Item E for possible action appeals from action of a County Board of Equalization pursuant to NRS 361-400, we have case number 21-150, Sunrise Mountain View Hospital, care of HCA Incorporated, commercial property located in Clark County. The petitioner, Neil Wolf, is available by Zoom, and the Clark County assessor is the respondent. The proper notice of hearing can be found on page 152 of your packet.
Thank you. Let's go to Clark County first to give us a brief orientation of the property.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Board. My name is Thomas Walusek. I'm representing the county on case 150. To spell my last name, W-A-L-U-S-E-K. Subject property is an acute care hospital located at the southeast corner of West Cheyenne Avenue and North Tiana Way within the Las Vegas Northwest Market. Its street address or postal address is 3050 North Tenaya Way. The Mountain View Hospital, as it's known, consists of 443,799 square feet. It's a 5-story acute care hospital with Class A frame construction, built in 1995 with additions in 2005, which results in an effective age of 2002, and is situated on a 28.02 acre tract. The assessor's office recommends holding our current taxable value of $127,783,531.
Now let's go to the petitioner first. Introduce yourself and let us know if you've been sworn today, and if not, we'll have Michelle Briggs swear you in.
Hi, my name is Neil Wolf, and I was sworn in this morning.
Thank you, Neil. And you heard the process then. You'll have 15 minutes to present your case, 15 minutes for the assessor's office, and then a final 5-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Can I go ahead and start now?
Please proceed.
Okay. Not to rehash the address and what type of property this is, but it is the Mountain View Hospital. The assessor's office and I have had numerous discussions amongst some of the issues related to income approach, cost approach, market approach. This size of a hospital of 443,000 square feet is something which is a little bit difficult to find an exact duplicate or replica of. So of course we use what we can. At least I don't want to speak for the assessor, but I think from our conclusions that we were kind of really zeroing in on one aspect of the property, and that was the central energy plant. Again, this was built in 95. There was some additional work in 2005, making an effective age of 2002. That part is true, but the central energy plant is still original equipment at 1995. That's 26 years old. Those items typically have some sort of a life between 15 to 20 years. That central energy plant is at its end of its life, and there's having many problems with it, and it's a difficulty finding parts for those items, and those items will be replaced very, very soon. Those items probably would be replaced in very soon now if COVID would not have come around in 2020 and the end of 19. So they're about a year behind. I have submitted the assessor just recently, last week, estimated costs to replace the central energy plant. And that cost was $5,076,000. That is broken down between construction, equipment, design, and building fees. Again, that was $5 million. Originally at the BOE, we did not have that estimate. We did not have the luxury of it. So we were using other CEP plants, central energy plant, that had been replaced under the umbrella of HCA hospitals across the country. And they ranged anywhere from $10 million to $20 million. The difference is those were just being replaced items all of in itself, meaning they went in and they dissected, they replaced that item only. Here, I believe the original estimates would have been higher, but they've downsized the central energy plant that's going to be done next year. This work's going to start almost about a year from now. And it's the central energy plant now is part of the larger type of a project. I don't have all the specifics of the larger project, but I do have at least an estimate, a good estimate of what it's going to cost to replace that central energy plant. And from our perspective, any potential buyer, any potential investor that was going to look at this, or any potential user that would look at this would say, yep, the energy plant is at its max. It's not just a short-lived item anymore. It's past its prime. It needs to be replaced fast and today. And it's going to be, it will be deducted from at least from the bottom line. And that's really all we're asking for today is some consideration. It's on at $127 million. We're asking for the $5 million to be knocked off of that. And I have not heard word back from the assessor's office if they've taken that into consideration, because at the BOE hearing, they did inform me that they would at least take a look at it if they could get it before the state hearing. We just got the information. I handed it over as fast as we could. And it's apologize about the phone. I hope that the assessor's office is looking at it, because this is specific information about the property at hand, and this item would be taken into consideration by any potential buyer. And that's all I have at this moment.
Any questions for the petitioner at this point?
So, Neil, you're looking at the $127 million as being a reasonable, stabilized value if this one item was addressed?
Yes, I am, from the perspective that both the assessor and I have looked at it from the income approach. He's up here, I'm down here, but still the assessment is right in the middle. We've looked at some more market sales, but again, the market sales are tough. I'll let the assessor explain his position as well. But at least from a reasonableness check, we've done our due diligence and looked at that. And I really, truly believe that if that $5 million was knocked off of that, at least we'd be a much more of a fair value.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Neil at this point? Seeing as none, let's go to Clark County.
Thank you, Board. One of the things that the case hinges on is, I think, ultimately going to be what the value of the property is. So I want to be able to take the time to present our summary of capitalization so we can tell you how we got to the numbers we have and that we actually agree on to some degree on this. Let's go to SBE 100, which is where we have our capitalization summary. There's two ways to do this type of property. One is a going concern analysis, where you take the full operating statements of an entity, allocate out costs for FF&E, business value, and ultimately leaving some kind of residual at real estate. Typically that's done because you don't have any data. You don't have any way to do the analysis any other way. You're kind of stuck. Over the last 5 to 10 years, the data for doing this kind of analysis on a real property basis has been exploding. I want to go through just a formality of the methodology. We have a leased rate for whatever that building is. In this case, it's a hospital. We attribute some kind of vacancy for it. In a typical analysis on the street, it would be 0 for this type of property because whoever's in this property is not going anywhere ever. But as an accommodation to the thought that there could be vacancy, we have a vacancy allowance. Then we have expenses that are deducted, and those expenses are particular to the type of lease structure that's used in this type of property, which is a triple net lease, in some cases even absolute net lease. At that point, then that results in an NOI, and you end up with a capitalization process where you're capitalizing that NOI into value. That's just a general overview of the type of methodology, and in fact, the appellant used the same methodology. We're still exactly on the same page on so many of these different things. I want you to draw your attention to SBE 101. That's the next page, and I don't know what you're looking at on your screens. I printed out a copy so I could actually read it with my bad eyes, but I don't know if you're going to be able to see that there. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's a page with income and expense comparison, acute care specialty, SNF, medical care. Is that what you're looking at?
Perfect. That's great. And,
Great.
And
You're
it's
all there.
And it's legible. That's best. Basically, over the last 10 years, these types of properties have started to be purchased. The real estate aspects have been purchased and then sold again and again. This is very similar to what we're seeing on the Strip right now with what's happening with the real estate that the operator is essentially dwelling in. All of these REITs, nationally and publicly exchanged REITs, have specialized in various forms of this type of medical office space. And it ranges. We have typical medical office, which is what I call light medical. You have dental, pediatric, and such and so forth. And then, for example, in the first column under Physicians Realty Trust, you end up with specialty, which is lab, imagery, urgent care, dialysis, a number of different specialty type of services along the line. You'll see that most of the net rents that have been actually indicated in the 10Ks of these companies are actually pretty similar. In fact, amazingly similar, considering the vast geography that these represent across the United States, about 110 million square feet. So we feel fairly comfortable that this is a number that you can feel somewhat confident in. But I'd like to draw your attention to two specific cases. Ventas, which is towards the end, is third from the end of this list. And then one that's called the last one, which is the Health Peak Properties. Now, as we move up the medical chain, if you will, of complexity and the level of acute care, there's a number of different facility options that are available. For example, in most of these others, they're medical offices. They don't have surgical centers. They don't have, typically, they don't have operating rooms, those kinds of things. As soon as you start moving into the more elevated medical facilities, that's where you find that. Ventas, specifically focuses in on medical office that's Class A construction. That's kind of an important one, too. This is not B class or middle of suburbia kind of stuff. And that rent is considerably greater. Even greater than that was the health sciences. Now, when we first presented this to the county board, at that time, I had a suspicion, but I didn't have any evidence. In this particular case, the Health Peak properties are life science buildings. They're predominantly single tenant. They're large campus. They have Class A infrastructure. You're talking about positive and negative pressure systems within the buildings themselves. We're talking about infectious disease control. These are very elevated buildings. And guess what? They rent for more. But our analysis, I couldn't confirm specifically that rental rate in an area that we were close by, and in a way that I felt comfortable about it. So we ended up basically going back to SBE 100. We ended up using our median and average of which were between the median and average of $23.86 and $26.68, and we basically said $24. That's where we came up with that rental rate, and that's incredibly generous, putting it that way. In the same page on 101, one of the things about a triple net lease is that there are some expenses that the landlord has to pay, whether it's structural, there could be casualty, there could be a number of other different aspects to this. All of these REITs report mostly, I should say this, and again, we took a difference of, or an average of these different reported expenses, and we ended up with about a $2 charge. Now, interestingly enough, the appellant was also, he was using a different methodology. He was using 8%, but it came out to be at $1.92. Again, we're very close. We're on the same page along that line. So the next step was to let's look at capitalization, but I wanted to share with you a couple of interesting data points to show that where this is going to end up going. On SBE 102, SBE 105, and SBE 108. Those are just pages for sales that were local, that had to do with orthopedic hospitals, Dignity Health, I call them micro hospitals. These are 40, 50,000 square foot places. This is not the same as a 440,000 square foot entity. So I'm not making that comparison right now, but I did want to share with you that when you back into the triple net rents of these things, we're at $42. We're at $54. We're at $49. So this $45 for the life sciences is not really out of range. It sounds extremely high, but it's really not. Just to make the point that $24 that we used for our analysis is more than reasonable on that line. On SBE 111, we have a capitalization chart that indicates a number of different ranges for capitalization rates from a number of different providers and so forth. We ended up actually reconciling to a 7% capitalization rate, which, by the way, was also the appellant's capitalization rate. Again, we're sort of in toto on this together on that. Our calculation at the end of that was we ended up with $131,871,703, and that is more than supports our 127 as the taxable fair value. Now, why go through all this? There seems to be a little bit of a misunderstanding in terms of what this process is. And I apologize to the appellant, frankly, if I didn't make this clear. But in any event, as you'll notice on page 100 at the bottom, we talk about the total real property value. We don't call that market value. We're saying that within the realm of reasonability, these numbers make sense. We can justify using them, and we can provide some relationship of value to that particular real property in this percent. We're not calling it market value. At the time of our first hearing, I was given information from very confidential sources, and I couldn't confirm them. So we couldn't use them. Since that time, we have had that, and it, again, lends its support more to the $42 to $44 a square foot range. If somebody's going to sell a property, as you well know, real estate is opportunistic. They're not going to try to be a nice guy or let's be fair. And they're going to try to get as much as they possibly can, and the other guy's going to hold them to the grindstone on this. So our $24 is extremely conservative, and if this property were in fact to sell, I'm estimating on a true market value analysis, we're closer to $189 million to $212. I can defend that. We can talk about that later on. But I just want to get the concept across that the 131 that we're suggesting here is extremely conservative and doesn't represent market value. It represents a tremendously generous test of our taxable value, which is 127. This is where the appellant and I actually agree 100%. And that is that if somebody were to purchase the property and they knew of this expense that had to be done, and whether it's $4 million or $6 million or 5.1, the reality is that that would be taken into consideration in that offer. Now, it would be done two ways. One, they would say, you give me a credit and I'll take care of the problem. I think in reality, because of the nature of the type of beast we're looking at here, they're saying, you fix it and then I'll pay you a full market value. But that's neither here nor there. The reality is that they would make that adjustment of $5.1 million off the market value of the property. Our $127 million is not market value. It's our total taxable value. So if the property would sell for 150, 140, 180, whatever those numbers are, and you took the $5 million off to make that accommodation, then you'd be probably pretty right on that. And I think that's exactly the way the market would operate. That doesn't really have to do with our taxable value, which is more than supported by the data that we have. So I would appreciate that the board actually supports our taxable value in light of the fact that the market value less whatever the accommodation would be is far in excess of our taxable value. There's a discussion about depreciation, and when we look at our statutory obligation at 1.5%, we end up with the concept of unity of construction. There's no segregation between different components or parts of these kinds of things. We know that all buildings have longer term life elements or components, and we know that they have shorter time life elements. So when we look at our depreciation, it includes all of those different things. We do have some depreciation, a significant amount actually in this particular property that accommodates that. As an aside, thank you, Mary Ann, for bringing that up. If you'll go to page 95, SBE 95, apologize. There's a depreciation for commercial properties table. And what this does, essentially, is it explains what the range of depreciation would be over years. This is not a straight line depreciation schedule. And you'll also notice that at the bottom of this table, it ends at 80. It doesn't go to 0. Most people confuse accounting straight line depreciation with real estate depreciation, or in this particular case, extended life depreciation. We know that at some point in time, a building is going to have, well, in personal property, they would call it salvage value. But in our world, we would really call that value in use. It goes from value in exchange to value in use. In this table, it's not a straight line. It actually curves over time. And I appreciate the appellant's comment that the individual component may have a shorter life than the entire unity of the property. But for our purposes, we're looking at the actual effective age of the property. In this case, it would be 19 years. But I'm just for sake of mathematics, let's just say 20 to make it easy. If we take the effective age in years on the left-hand column and then bring it across to the 40-year lifespan of the property, we end up with roughly 30% of depreciation. Well, 30 divided by 20 is 1.5%. That's the statutory limit as well. So we're not out of line with the depreciation on the property along that line. In any property, you're going to have the ongoing replacement of different components over time. That's expected. That's understood. In fact, this table is generated by thousands of buildings where the actual depreciation at different points in time have been extracted from their market sales. So I think this is fairly valid for what we're doing here. But at this particular point in time, the property is, I think, appropriately depreciated. I think it is also appropriately, has an appropriate taxable value associated with it. And I think that any adjustment to a market sales price is fair, but it wouldn't be against our taxable value.
Thank you. My question on SBE 5, the petitioner says in bullet point 1, the assessor's cost approach applies a 70-year life to the hospital buildings. And if I just heard you correct, on page 95, it sounded like it was a 40-year life that was applied. So can you provide us some guidance? What do you actually do?
Absolutely. And I think this was just, and I'm not going to speak for the appellant, but he and I have talked about this, and he understood what he had written down there. We have a 50-year maximum life, and now that means 75% in depreciation. Interesting enough, that's very close to the 80% we have on the table over here. So when we're looking at the 70-year life, I think there was just a little bit of confusion by taking the 1.5 or whatever on the appellant's case, but he can speak to that himself, and I don't have a problem with that at all. To say that it should be adjusted to a more realistic 50-year life is generous on their part, because our market data from all the hospitals that we've been looking at, and in fact information that they've provided themselves, suggests more of a 38 to 42-year life. That's the way they technically look at it. Having said that, we were also provided with information for sales from HCA that went out and bought other hospitals, and we have those sales. Now, we're not presenting that data because it was extremely messy and dirty data, and I can get to that in a second. But the reality is that all the ones that had been purchased were already had an effective age. They'd been built in the 40s, but they had an effective age of 83, 60, 50. We were looking at 40 to 60-year depreciations, and they were still selling for $120 a foot. Well, that goes right back to that salvage value. The reason why we're not using the data right now is because all that data had these are very complex sales. For example, the first one, 1.8 million square feet. Fine, call up the assessor in that area, Chatham County, I think it is. In any case, talk to him about that. What do you have on the sale, blah, blah, blah. Well, the building and everything we have for this property is 1.4 million square feet. I said, well, I just got information that's 1.8. He said, I would love to know where they're hiding the 400,000 square feet. There's just messy data. Oh, wait a minute. It sold for $483 million, of which $185 million was allocated for the real estate. Well, we forgot to mention the other $259 million that they had committed to refurbish the property as a post-sale adjustment. These things get very complex. So after looking through a lot of these different data points, it became clear that we really couldn't use those particular data sales. In one case, they had a sale that actually had 19 buildings separate from the hospital. Well, you can't use common size percentages or any kind of unit of comparisons for that kind of stuff. It's just messy data. I'm not in any way impugning the integrity of the offer, and. I don't believe they had that data. I just am a born researcher, so I dig into this stuff. So I'm like, on the other hand, we have been collecting data, and I do have some sales, and for leased properties that all were from 2003, as I recall, to 2018 in terms of construction. So they're not 1960 or 1950 builds. They're very modern types of facilities. And they're all, the average of those is right around between, I think the median is $523 per square foot, and the average is $543. So to suggest that 297 is, or whatever we're at, is not a good number, is not ridiculous. The appellant's not saying that. He's trying to apply an adjustment to that value, and I think it's to the wrong number. We agree that it should be applied to the market value. We do not agree that it should be applied to the total taxable value as calculated by replacement cost new less depreciation plus market value of the land. That we don't have. That's new information. I think that would be, well, on SBE 115, we have a number of sales that we have locally. I'm not hanging my hat on these sales. They're not exactly, I don't think that they're apples to apples. I'm not saying they're apples to apples. I don't want to imply that. But the average for the four sales, sales 3, 4, 5, and 6, the average is like $631 a foot. It's very critical when we're looking at these types of facilities to understand the number of operating rooms they have, because that's the high profit center within the hospital. And I'd be able to adjudicate the various sales on those types of metrics. So I have, like I said, I got this information late. I don't want to present it as that type of evidence. I'm just telling you that it exists. I'm happy to do so if you want, but.
I'm going to keep it more high level. In round, rough terms, for depreciated value in place of the improvements, I think you guys are at $112,500,000 for the current tax year. Assume that's been depreciated already by 30%. That would indicate about $50 million in depreciation that the assessment already recognizes. Would that be a fair understanding that from your replacement cost new, less 30%, about $50 million in depreciation has been recognized already?
I calculated that, but I don't have the page. So, what is it?
If it's 19 years.
28.5%, 30 is close, along that line. I don't, we could work back into that.
No, it's just in a general range, so significant depreciation.
Correct.
We're talking about a $5 million item here, and you've already recognized $50 million of depreciation that is to account for some of the short-lived items that don't last the entire economic life of the structure, such as 20
That's
years
correct.
for an HVAC system central plant.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I would just inquire just a little bit from a business perspective, understanding that the hospitals differ from kind of surgical centers and surgical suites, right, generally speaking, not only from its profit source perspective in that hospitals, are required to indigent services, Medicaid and different things like that. So how did that kind of weigh into your calculation when you're looking at a hospital versus kind of, I know one of the comparisons here was like more of just a surgical suite.
In this particular case, we have a situation in the marketplace where a purchaser is not really buying the hospital. They're buying the hospital real estate. And so the operation or the operator is an entirely separate entity. But I will say this, related to what your question is, if I can segue just for a second. I mentioned that, if you look at the 101, page 101, we have a lot of rents for millions, hundreds of millions of square feet at between basically $24 and $26. Why is that? Why would that be? Why all across the country, in all different parts of the country, in all different regions? Well, there's such a thing as economic feasibility. And what we have here is that we have payors who can only pay so much for their different procedures or their different levels of care. And so at that point, the operator is literally relegated to being limited to only paying a certain amount, assuming they want to make a profit. I'm assuming they do. So in one hand, it's limited by what's getting paid over here. But for our purposes, we look at the market and we're saying, what are people, highly intelligent people, willing to pay as a lease, knowing what they're going to be paid? Because they're the operators. So we don't really have that. Now, another angle of this, and Neil can back me up on this, but we asked HCA directly, were they involved in the PPP and whatever like that, and we were not only told that was also true, but surprisingly, the hospitals did fairly well. There's only like 3 or 4 in the entire 178 hospitals they have that were in trouble, and that had to do with very specific regionality issues and such and so forth. But the rest of them, they actually came out pretty strong. Basically, you had higher utilization at a lower rate, and it averaged itself out, and what was the differential was in some cases made out from the PPP costs. So they weren't hurt that way at all. But did that answer your question?
Mr. Gray, I would like to just add that we did not look at the business value of the hospital, Tom's analysis really addressed the rental rate of what they would lease that property for and then function as a hospital, similar to just somebody renting an office space, but renting a hospital. If we had taken those things into consideration in our income, then we would have had to do some other deductions to get us back to that real property value, which we have done, by the way, in the past. We have not had this kind of data. Tom Wallace has really dug in and done a lot of research to get us this data. So we're really thankful that we have it. I think it gives us a more valid starting place when we can really just look at the real estate.
And so my concern, and again, just looking kind of at the real estate component of it is, I mean, Nevada's hospital system differs from most state hospital systems, whether it be teaching hospitals or private owned hospitals or county hospitals or whatever the case may be. So even when we look at that rental rate, has there been any accounting at all to divide and separate that out? And if not, that's okay. I mean, curious as to how deep down, the rabbit hole we went on that.
No, there's not. And in fact, it gets to the point where if you're reading those 10Ks for these different REITs, they specifically don't want to be involved in any capacity with any form of management in any way at all. In a kind of a weird way, it's a big item. Let's face it, it's 450,000 square feet, and it's mailbox money for these guys. They send them a check. That's what that is. Now, the negotiation of that process to get to that rental rate is where the secret sauce is. There are other REITs in there, Medical Properties Trust, which only buys hospitals. But those are really specifically geared to sale leaseback arrangements where I want to make sure that I can develop for my REIT a stream of income, an income stream that's secure and constant. And you want to be able to unlock some value from your hospital. And so we work together on that, and it's really not to say it's not arm's length is too far, because it truly is, but it's not market driven. It's not market driven. A classic example of this, you have Blackstone, you have other people like that who are buying chunks of the real estate on the Strip. Well, they're paying this money, and I'm thinking at some point in their futures, they're going to trade that. They can't pay too much, and sure as heck, MGM or Caesars is not going to take too little. So they're already putting into their calculus, into their secret sauce, the fact of their disposition. Whereas some of these places, like, for example, Medical Trust, they clearly say, our goal is to buy and as many hospitals as we can. Period. That's their growth path. They don't have anything in their portfolio that says can't wait to sell all this stuff. It doesn't exist. So there's slightly different numbers of kind of nuances or metrics to what's being done along this line. But yeah, these are straight rental rates. It's not to give you an idea. Actually, it's a great question. HCA was forthcoming enough to provide us with the one lease that they were aware of. And that was for 1.8 million square feet, called the Medical Center in Dallas. And that was the first time I've ever come across a lease that had a base rate and then a percentage rent for the hospital. Now, all of the other, that's the only one I've come across, period, in 2 years of research. So that's a unique scenario along the line. So yes, in that particular instance, the landlord was willing to take a lower base rate, and then, bet on the come to see what these guys could operate against.
With that, let's go back to Neil for your 5 minutes of closing.
Neil, you're muted.
I guess I tried to make this short. Obviously, the assessor's response was not the same direction I guess I thought I was going. So I understand the assessor on page 101 of the report talks about the rental rates again. And I guess I would like to point out that the very top, the fourth line down that says thousands of square feet per building, there's not one building over 100,000 square feet in this study. I told Thomas that the first time we talked about it, and he's still using it. So again, these rates don't apply to the same type of a hospital. There's not one hospital on there at 50,000 square feet. And if you have a true type of a hospital, you have hallways, you have common areas, you have cafeterias that would not drive the type of rents that the smaller type of facilities do. That's why they can charge higher rents, is because the revenue per square foot's higher, significantly higher. So these aren't really even comparable. The assessor's page 102 through 10 whatever, he wants to talk about properties that have sold in Nevada. Well, $672 a square foot. I need to research this sale because these sales price per square foot are significantly high, and higher than even most of all of the sales that I've seen in California. I did a national study of sales, and these are the top three. And if you back into it to get the rents, which I don't agree with backing into it, because number one, they don't know anything about the sale. So how can you back into it to come up with a rent? Not to mention every one of these are 30 to 40,000 square feet as well. So it goes right in with his spreadsheet. So it's incredible bad information. Again, going back to my analysis on page SBE 20, I mean, I've submitted some sales as well, but some of them are actually the same sales as what the assessor had. And we talked about those, how they're kind of, or at least irrelevant from the perspective of size and price per square foot. There's nothing on there. There's actually one that's two over 100,000 square feet, and one of them's $108 a square foot, significantly less per square foot than what we're being assessed at. And my page SPE 19 was my income approach. Everything's the same as I have on here with the assessor, except for the rent. I use $17 a square foot, and I'll probably concede that I could probably go to 20 to 22. And if I went to 22, that amounts to a cap rate of $119 million in value. That's without any deduction for the central energy plant. Again, I'm showing a value less than what it's being on at. The assessor is showing something above that. And again, I was trying to make this simple from one adjustment, from a cost adjustment of the central energy plant that's going to be replaced. We have a very good estimate of value that's in the assessor's hands, and that's $5,076,000, and that's the only adjustment that we're requesting today. And I believe it's a very fair ask. That's all I have. Thank you.
Question for you, Neil, and just making sure I'm understanding your criticism correctly of the average square foot of the comparables. The numbers are in thousands. It says I take that to be, this is the aggregate square feet that this REIT owns, and then a couple lines down says the number of buildings. So to get the average building size, it would be adding 3 zeros to the total square footage and then dividing by number of buildings, and you come up with somewhere between 25 to 60,000 square feet for a lot of those properties. Is that how you look at it as well, or am I misunderstanding it in your opinion?
You are correct. That's the way I'm looking at it. And even when you go across there, I think the largest one, well, that's even from IRM. Their IRM studies are 83,000 square feet. But yes, there's a significantly smaller types of assets that you're comparing a 400,000 square foot hospital to. And if you have a 30 or 40 or 50,000 square foot type of a facility where you're making money on 85% of the square footage, that's why those rents are there. But when you have a hospital with hallways of 40 foot wide and 30 foot wide where you can't draw income from, and you have a number of operating rooms, not to mention this facility again was built in 95. Many of the rooms upstairs are multi-rooms. They can only put one person in there. I mean, the way they build a hospital today is significantly different than what they would build one in 95. They used to throw 2 people in a room. I mean, they don't do that anymore. It's completely against the HIPAA rules.
Anything further in closing before we ask questions, to the extent there are questions from the board?
I'm trying to paw through the information and find the reference. The assessor is reporting this building at about 443,000 square feet. Someplace I read that there'd been subsequent additions that brought the square footage up to around 611,000 square feet. Am I misinterpreting the information, or was that a comp that I was looking at?
One of the other hospitals in town,
Okay.
Sunrise, is that size.
Okay.
But the 443 is with all of the changes that have occurred on Mountain View.
Okay. And then I had pulled a number from someplace that,
I remember reading that, Bob. That is in there somewhere relative to if it's a subject or one of the comparables. That's in that package somewhere.
Chairman Johnson? I just want to, I don't know what year it was, but it was in the past 5 years. They have done what am I trying to say? They've added square footage to this building, but it's already included in our record. So I believe they added at least 2 floors, if possibly 3 floors, to one side of the hospital. So
I'm looking, where I'm looking is on page 150 in the discussion from
The county board.
the county board. Second paragraph, regarding depreciation, staff advised that the hospital constructed in 1995 covered 443,000 square feet. The additions increased the square feet to 611,000, and the building is being depreciated at 28.5%.
do you have the property record card? Let's see if we can find the property record card for you real quick.
Is that where you had seen it?
Yeah, thank you. I remembered reading that.
I'm looking on page SBE 144 that shows a building summary. Would that extra square footage be the 162,000 for the parking garage? Okay.
Yes, so I think that we have a new, it's not a new clerk, but a new person that takes the verbal testimony that's given at the county board and translates it. We don't have a direct transcript here, so it may be the way that they typed it. We didn't read that in detail. The total building is 611,901 square feet. That includes all three buildings, parking, garage, the main hospital, and then another
Physical plant of some sort.
Yes. So inclusive of all that. But that does include, that's why our effective age isn't 1995. It has a newer effective age because there was additional square footage added to the building. Not this year, but within the past 3 years.
And there's no dispute, it didn't sound like.
No.
Relative to the size of the building.
And we're looking at the rental rate of the actual hospital itself. So that's why we used the 400,000. We didn't include the parking garage, obviously, in that square footage. It's necessary for the operation.
I heard in other states that you can add on the parking garage in addition. From earlier, I kid, I'm sorry.
Well, now that the hotel casinos are charging for the parking garages, it's a whole different scenario. And I think in the state of California, when they charge for garages, they are a revenue producing structure, right? Okay, thank you.
No, and I digress. But thank you for that. Any other questions now for Neil before we close this and deliberate? With that, and Neil, I think I saw your head nod, but you don't dispute the building area as reported by the assessor, do you? Okay.
No, I don't.
Well, thank you. With that said, I want to close this. And my thoughts here are, the first primary argument, I don't buy relative to the 70-year life. That seemed to be the primary argument, is you've used a 70-year economic life, but the assessors used a 40-year economic life, and they've got substantial depreciation. I do think that the HVAC system needing to be replaced is a significant item, but that's taken into account in the roughly $50 million of depreciation that's already been accrued based on replacement costs new for this structure. I do think that there's some other arguments relative to the appropriateness of much smaller facilities that are surgical in nature, not broad-based like a general hospital, and the economics are significantly different. But I didn't get left feeling that there was anything I could sink my teeth into other than what the assessor did. And when I get left in that feeling, generally, I go back to, it's the petitioner's job to compel me, and they have the burden to prove their case. And I didn't feel here that they carried that burden. That's my thought, but I'd welcome. And let's start. Bob, do you want to start? Or?
So regarding the depreciation, Nevada really, they've separated the depreciation from the age life model. The statute requires a 1.5% per year. That's just what statute requires. The basis of the Nevada tax system is not ad valorem. It's a bifurcated system with a market value of land and a depreciated replacement cost of new of the improvements with 1.5% per year depreciation based upon its effective age. It's not, it has its roots in an age life model, but that is the statutory depreciation without regard to it's the same for grain silos as it is for 7-Elevens. It's 1.5% per year for improvements, and so the argument regarding a life, an estimated economic life, is not. It's relevant to a certain degree, but it's not the basis of what the depreciation is. It's statutory. So I'm not. I don't think that that's a particularly relevant argument. I agree with Ben that using that 1.5% per year depreciation, this property would have a replacement cost new, including land value, of about $178 million. If you could build it consistent with the costs used in Marshall Valuation Service using the land value that's been established, which suggests that the statutory depreciation has captured $50 million in depreciation, and it's likely that it's these kinds of items that would be included in that existing calculation of depreciation. What was the third item? There were three things I was going to say.
We're going to go into the comparables?
Nope.
The rents?
I'll think about it, and I'll let Tyree talk for a little bit, and then maybe
Definitely
it'll
the
come
parking
back to me.
structure. I think you wanted to talk about that.
No. I'm back. So this is unique to the circumstances that we've faced in the past, where these elements of unique depreciation, what we've seen in the past is a clear calculation or clear estimate by the property owner that the assessed value or the taxable value exceeds market value. We've come to a stabilized market value and then deducted these unusual elements of depreciation. It could be, in a residential circumstance, a roof that needs to be replaced or a foundation that's damaged or something like that. And we do make those deductions from the market value when the market value is already demonstrably below where we are on the taxable value. But this is an unusual circumstance where the market value appears to be higher than the taxable value. And so if we look at that paradigm where we're deducting some replaceable item from a market value, it still doesn't appear to drop below the taxable value that's been established. And so that was my thought process. It's kind of a rhetorical comment, but it points out that there is a difference in this circumstance between many of the ones where, in fact, we have made that deduction for a curable item of depreciation in the past. And I did want to make that distinction.
Are you done now?
I am.
I kid. That was helpful. Tyree, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, I'll be short and brief. Obviously, the assessor's office has done a wonderful job and has dug in to really try to make sure that there is equity that has been given to the appellant here. I do continue to hold reservations, and the only reservation really is centered around the difference in between the comps and the business models. Again, having an appreciation and understanding of how hospitals, essentially they're profit centers and how that works, and understanding again that when you have a large scale hospital, as appellant had discussed, whether you're looking at hallway sizes or cafeterias and things like that. Or, I mean, frankly, when you look at, again, comparing it to surgical centers where truly there's a welcome room and then surgical bays. Those are going to drive profits much different than a hospital that has a room that usually is meant to accommodate even something as simple as guests, which again is not a profit center. So those are my only reservations, but again, I do believe that a thorough job has been done by the assessor's office. So I would be interested to see what type of motion comes out, and I'll reserve my vote for them.
We're giving Glenn that honor of making the motion.
No, I still have, I'm not done.
Oh, okay.
It appears. So regarding the size issues, the size and the investment magnitude, I do note that it would have been helpful to do a little bit more research. If you look at, if we were to refer to page 106, the Dignity Health sale, in the sales history, it reports that there was a sale of 12 properties that sold for $156 million, and another portfolio, or possibly the same portfolio, that sold for $143 million. That begins to address, in gross terms, the magnitude of the purchase of this property, where, we're looking at a market value of $100 to $130 million, $140 million, someplace in that neighborhood. So while it doesn't reflect exactly this property, a sale that involves $156 million strike price probably involves something in the order of 400,000 or 500,000 square feet, although it is divided between a number of properties. Further research on that sale or those two portfolio sales would have been useful just from a magnitude perspective.
Now it's to you, Glenn.
Now it's to me. You want me to turn on? Okay. The recommended taxable value is, I can't read it, it's too small. 123?
127.
120. Okay. One. Okay, I'd make a motion that we uphold the county's taxable value at the 137, 783, 531 figure, as it doesn't exceed the value of the property. Though it makes no difference, I would admit that this is my neighborhood hospital. Been there several times.
You're their cash cow.
I am. I see my bills.
I might want to add to the motion that we as a board believe that the $50 million, $51 million in depreciation that's already being reflected in the taxable value most likely includes the $5 million in depreciation applicable to the energy plant that needs replacement.
With that said, and do you accept Bob's
Yes, I do.
to your motion? Okay, so Bob's comments are incorporated into the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
With that being said, any further comments from board members? Seen as none, all in favor, vote aye. Aye. Any opposed, vote nay. Motion carries unanimously. With that, Jeff, is there anything else on the agenda for today?
Nothing else is on the agenda today. We will continue tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. to hear the remainder of the cases on the agenda.
Great, and with that, I want to have public comment before we close for today. So if anyone wants to give public comment here, please raise your hand so you know that you're coming forward. We'll allow you. And then, Christina, please open up the phone line too and just see if there is anyone that's interested.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's anybody on the Zoom who would like to give public comment, please hit *9 to raise your hand.
And then, perfect, we'll go to your public comment.
Yeah, this is my first time in front of both the county and the state boards. And I just wanted to tell you guys that your discussion, your analytical, going through analytical analysis, going through the data, looking at the different issues, as I was listening to some of these cases and I was kind of, getting behind one or another points of view, and then somebody would bring up a point of view and I'd say, wait a minute, I didn't think of that. So I really appreciate what you're doing here and just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you, and our respect to your office. You guys do a really good job, and that's a really important function for our state and our Clark County to operate correctly. So there's a lot of respect. We know that we dig in and it's in one avenue. I just never want to take it personal because overall the quality that comes out of your office is exceptional. So we're very appreciative, and those were very well prepared cases today.
Well, and Marianne and I had been chatting earlier that, given the nature of the problems that we faced in 2020 with the pandemic and early in 21, I want to thank you guys, and I think that it'll be reflected by the other assessors throughout the state, that you guys have done a great job in addressing this particular problem this time, because it is without precedent. And I had nightmares of having thousands of appeals that were horribly complex. And you've been able to come up with a model that really resulted in an astonishingly low number of appeals, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah, and I would just like to go and echo those comments, and then also thank the staff. Much like here, this was actually my first hearing in person, so it's nice to see everybody. And thank you so much to the staff, Christina, Jeff, and Michelle, and Danessa, for getting us all taken care of today. We definitely appreciate you, and it's nice to be back in person.
Hear, hear.
Christina, has anyone raised their hand indicating that they want to provide public comment?
No, we have no public comment at this time.
Great. And any other public comment here today? Seen as none, I believe we can adjourn until tomorrow at 8:30 a.m.